This is the Rachel Show, where we interview key experts on topics like election fraud, lawfare, and media bias, and other hot topics. And today, with the tragic heart attack death of my longtime good friend Mark Brnovich, who was the Arizona Attorney General for two terms, we are going to cover a lot of the amazing election integrity work he did, especially on the botched 2020 election in Maricopa County, with Bryan Blehm, who was Kari Lake's election attorney, who's also done a lot of work on the 2020 election and other botched elections. So let's just begin. I'll just tell everyone, my brief experience with Brnovich. I knew him back when we were both assistant attorney generals at the Arizona Attorney General's office. We had an office next to each other, and we bonded because we had both written conservative opinion columns, for him at ASU, me at U of A. And remained very close friends. He was literally texting me 2 days before he passed away about what I should do about the corrupt Arizona bar. And other point I really want to get out about him is I believe the mainstream media lied about him and made him seem like he wasn't that aggressive when it came to combating election fraud. And I'll put a link to my article that came out today on Town Hall, going over and refuting all of this and showing how actually proactive he was, calling for things like putting Katie Hobbs in jail and constantly feuding with the Maricopa County supervisors who would not let him perform a full audit of the 2020 election. So, Bryan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on all the corruption that happened in the 2020 election, some of the corruption that you saw and why we were never able to get anywhere investigating it.
Well, because they're actively concealing it. And that's in large part, you mentioned Brnovich and my heart goes out to everyone who knew him, his family. I personally did not know him. I've met him a couple of times. But until I came back to Arizona to do the audit, I spent most of my time away. And so, but nevertheless, my heart goes out to his family. 59 years old, heart attack, way too young to go. But again, it goes along with the stress of constantly combating, as he had to do the bar. I think your article was excellent, by the way. I think you pointed out he had 12 bar complaints that he had to defend against, along with his staff who were working under him to bring, some of these investigatory steps forward. The problem is that you have this cabal, and that's what we were talking about last week, right? When we were talking about, this huge propaganda machine that was created, this the seizure of U.S. elections by John Jay, and they would ultimately fall under the auspices of CISA, right, as well as other agencies. But how do you get the information that they don't want to get, or they don't want you to get? It's very difficult. We've been struggling for a very long time to get Runbuck's loading dock video, some for the day after the 2020 election.
You guys have been
Something that
trying to
should
get
be
that for like 2 or 3 years now, because I wrote
right,
articles about that, and they still
brother.
won't turn it over.
No, they won't. They're going out of their way to give it up, which is why we need the Department of Justice in the state of Arizona to investigate some of these issues. But I know that the AG's office under Brnovich ran into the same problems we ran into when we were doing the audit, right? They did turn over the machines. They did turn over the ballots, which we, cast over a very long, or counted over a very long hot summer. And
But they
then,
never turned over like the routers and the server logs and the things you need
right.
to do a comprehensive audit.
Right, correct, 100%. And they still won't turn over to the feds the voter registration database, which is the first step in any fraudulent election, right?
Oh yeah,
And
Adrian
so,
Fontes, the cartel lawyer, is saying that he will go to jail before he turns over the voter
right,
registration records.
right.
And the reality is, when people register to vote, that all is
Mhm.
federal. Like the U.S. government already has that information anyway. So why is he stonewalling?
Right. Well, you stonewalling because you don't want to lose your voters. So, there's a huge debate in the United States. Should citizens be allowed to vote? Citizens are not, or non-citizens be allowed to vote? Non-citizens are not allowed to vote in federal elections, period. That's the law. In the state of Arizona, non-citizens are not allowed to vote. You must be able to prove your citizenship, and that's why in the state of Arizona, right, you have this federal only ballot, and so the federal government is less more lax, I guess, on proving citizenship.
You
So
just
you
have
can
to say I'm a citizen and check the box, and
right,
nobody
right,
checks, even in Arizona.
right. In the state of Arizona, you have to prove you're a citizen in order to vote,
Only in
whether or
the
not
state and local elections, right? But in
correct.
federal, nope.
Right. Right. And that's why Arizona has this federal only ballot. Because if you can't prove your citizenship to vote in an Arizona election, then you're not given an Arizona ballot. You're given the federal government ballot, which doesn't require the stringent proof of citizenship. And so, the fact that Arizona has so many only voters, enough to swing, most elections, then that's a problem. And so, the United States Constitution confers upon the states the power to run elections, but that isn't an absolute power. Because the U.S. Constitution then goes on to state that Congress from time to time may pass laws impacting elections in the United States of America. And so, the Trump administration is perfectly within the law under the Motor Voter Act and the Help America Vote Act, which both deal with voter registration in ensuring that the voter registration databases are being administered properly and that only U.S. citizens are voting in federal
And
elections,
and
right?
let's not forget that the Democrats have promoted HR1 for a few years now, a
Mhm.
congressional bill that would federalize elections. They want to take
Right,
over whenever they're in power of the presidency and Congress. They want to
right,
completely take it away from localities and states.
right. Well, and they've sort of already done that. We talked a little bit about that on the show last time we were together. Was John Jay on January 6th of 1960, or I'm sorry, 1960, of 2017, after Trump is elected, decreed elections in the United States to be critical infrastructure, which gives the federal government, boom, the teeth to get into them. The federal government's involved with Runback, it's involved with Dominion, it's involved with all the voting machine systems, it's involved with all the people that make your voter registration databases, right, that are online. They've got to be in some form online,
We've proven
right?
this repeatedly despite their denials. Yes.
Right. And so they might be on a virtual private network, but that virtual private network is still running in the cloud, right? Which is, what we generally refer to as the internet. And we know this because what was it? 2022, was it the primary election in Maricopa County or was it the general election? I can't recall. They were shut down. They went down. People couldn't vote because when they would go to a polling center to vote, the cloud had been affected by this hack that happened, and people could vote in Tucson. It affected Maricopa County, so Pima and Maricopa County, that obviously shows you that the voter registration databases are online because they have to be interconnected, right? If somebody goes to a vote center here and they vote, boom, the system's supposed to tell all other vote centers that this person who's a registered voter voted.
And,
so
and
they
let's
don't
and
get a
let's
vote
not
again.
forget that the websites online, like the Arizona Secretary of State's websites, they get hacking attempts like 50 times a day. And even cartel lawyer Adrian Fontes admitted earlier this year, last year, that foreigners, and I can't remember which country, successfully hacked the Arizona Secretary of State's website. And what they did is they changed the candidates' photos to other photos. So I don't know what the message was,
And
but it was
I
successfully hacked.
I think he was blaming Iranians, and a lot of that is, I mean, look what was happening at the time in the state of Arizona, right? You have Adrian Fontes doing this big push with the legislature to get more money to fund, all of this election cybersecurity because, CISA, they're sort of out of the picture. And then their big non-governmental organization that they worked with, the Center for Internet Security, which up until like 2022 derived 99.8% of its budget from the federal government, from US tax dollars, right?
Wow.
Doing the work that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency couldn't do under the US Constitution, i.e., censorship, i.e., monitor our systems, right? And so, that's a huge problem because they put these little boxes, into the local governments, this NGO, non-governmental organization, and they have these contracts that essentially allow them carte blanche access to the county systems. Well, one of the questions I have is, was the county attorney's office on that system, right? Did a third party non governmental organization that worked directly with the national security agencies have access to Maricopa County Attorney's Office? That's a very scary proposition because that would give them, theoretical access to grand jury information, witnesses, to all sorts of stuff. But that's sort of part and parcel of how, under John Jay, they took over federal elections. They federalized the elections. Susan Spalding creates CISA, and they begin moving into our local governments as a tool to sort of control the electronics, right? All the electronics associated with our elections, whether those electronics be whether they be the voting machines that you go, that some people vote on. I don't think they do it here in Arizona, but like in Georgia, if you go vote, you actually push a button
There's
on the
no paper
screen.
ballots at all. Yeah,
There's no paper ballot, right? It
of course not.
spits out a QR code that, I mean, come on now. Spits out a QR code. So these machines, who knows, is it tracking the right ballot? Is it not? In Arizona, we have tabulators. We vote on paper ballots. We have tabulators.
They're
And
not
so
hand counted.
not
Yeah.
hand counted, not hand counted. And so, that's part of the problem is that, our elections have gone into this big black box of secrecy. And ever since the 2020 election, they have worked very hard overtime to keep elections secret, right? And the reason for that is whenever groups like We the People, USA Alliance get access to these government records, we embarrass and humiliate them, right? It's like the data we got after the first Lake trial about, how long it was taking these signature verifiers to actually verify signatures,
And
right?
I'll point out that's one of the key things that Brnovich attacked them over. He issued an
Right,
interim report showing, like that famous meme of the monkey going like this on the mouse button. Oh, there goes.
right, right.
Yeah, he challenged them on that and said that was something that need to be fixed, and they never fixed it.
Well, and what's funny is we were able to take two people, right? We got two people that you could clearly see their computers and them sitting behind their computers doing signature verification. And we were able to compare them, one of them doing, a reasonably good job of verifying signatures. Of course, that means they were working slower than the other guy who, at trial said, "Oh yeah, we were going to fire him because he wasn't doing a very good job." Right. And I
Convenient line after the fact.
Right. But if you look at the slope of his timing curve, he begins, looking like he's fairly conscientious, looking at signatures. And then, shortly into his tenure there, probably when they were going to fire him, boom, it drops and he starts, he's the monkey clicking the button. But we actually were able to identify him by watching the video and sort of pairing it with these different users that we got. And you could tell when the man takes a nap. You can tell when he gets up to go get a coffee. Literally, he falls asleep at his keyboard and wakes up and goes, bam, right? And this is all part of the problem. So, what does Stephen Richer do as a result of that utter and complete humiliation of putting that information out? What does he do? He rearranges the signature verification room so the cameras no longer can see these people doing their job.
Unreal. Unreal.
Right. Right. And so instead of transparency, which Richard always claimed, oh, transparency, you come and take a tour. Yeah, let's take a tour before the election. That's not transparency at all. The meat
They're
and the
not doing
potato.
anything yet. There's nothing to see.
Right. The meat and the potatoes are what's happening during the election, right? And so, you have a whole host of issues, but a lot of this was brought out, as we talked about last time, by this huge propaganda machine that was created as a result of the Obama machine working with SJ Turk prior to President Donald Trump taking office. And then they built this whole network, right under his nose to do what happened in 2020. And so the propaganda machine is still working overtime. If you look, Stephen Richards still out there, working overtime to
He's just
to
calling. Recently, did you see the latest? He doesn't want Tina Peters to get out of prison. He just sent
no, no.
this guy is unreal. And I want to bring up something else, Bryan, regarding something that you and Brnovich both worked on. So you were trying to get the video from the Rumbeck's loading dock to find out, what happened to all these ballots that appeared to be inserted into the election there.
Right,
Well, that was one of the key things that Brnovich was also looking into. He estimated that 100,000 to 200,000 ballots lacked a chain of custody. And
right.
no one did anything about it. The corrupt judges wouldn't do anything about it. And as I always point out, for much more smaller things prior to 2020 than that, like just voters having to wait in a long line, didn't have to prove that there wasn't any ballots cast or that there were bad ballots cast. Just waiting in a long line, judges used to order new elections for that reason.
Well, I agree 100%. And I'm not gonna go as far as you to say corrupt judges, because I'm looking at this sort of holistically, right? That I'm taking when I look at Arizona elections or what's actually happened in the United States, because I traveled all over the United States during the 2020 election. Ain't no way Joe Biden won that election. There's absolutely no way. Even in California, I think I saw maybe 2 yard signs the entire time I spent driving all up and down, the state of California. And, you would go out west and, the western part of the state is typically far more conservative. And I mean, Trump everywhere, even Trump along the coast, even Trump in Santa Barbara, right? And so, there's no way Joe Biden won that election, at least based on my observations. And that's one of the reasons I got actively involved after the election in November 2020, because, something was amiss. And so looking at it holistically, one of the reasons I'm going to sort of throw the judicial branch a bone is, we have Democrat, judges, we have Republican judges. So what? They get to appoint theirs, we get to appoint ours. The problem is the national security state, which dug its heels into our judicial branch of government. And again, that was Susan Spalding. And you want to see some video? I don't know how I would do that.
Or just tell us, summarize what she said.
Well, she's given a speech to some big lefty national, security organization NGO. And she's talking about how, she worked with the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court to start her educational campaign, right, about Russian disinformation. They worked very actively through the American Bar Association on issues of Russia collusion to basically elect Donald Trump, right? That's what the mantra becomes
But then
with this
you're really
propaganda
good,
stuff.
Brian, at pointing out that she has used this concept of Russian disinformation to
Right.
crack down on people expressing concerns about election wrongdoing. Americans.
100%, 100%. And that's, another video. I mean, I have it if you want to, if I can cue it up. I mean, the very reason Arizona's judicial branch created this disinformation task force was Susan Spalding and her partner. Oh my God, Parker. Can never remember her name, but both of them worked at the Central Intelligence Agency at the same time, and then they go, do all this national security stuff into various agencies,
Deep
you know,
state swamp creatures.
right,
They are,
right,
it's like what do you call it? A
one
revolving
hundred percent,
door between
right.
those federal agencies.
Yeah, 100%. But, we have three branches of government, right? The executive, run by the president. We have Congress, the legislative branch that makes our laws. And then we have the judicial branch. But here we have, under the president of the United States, the national security agencies very, very active in Congress, right? Very actively lobbying Congress. But now we get them very actively lobbying the judicial branch of government on this threat of Russia trying to, undermine our democratic institutions, right? And that's what it becomes. Oh, they're trying to undermine our democratic institutions, so that people will have no faith in our government anymore. And one of name a period in history when people don't criticize their government, right?
Well, and, and
What is
and
it?
Brian, I believe the reason they're doing it is not only to crack down on election dissenters, people who think there's election wrongdoing going on. I believe they're using as an excuse to take over all areas of state and local government because, oh no, this is a federal problem. Russia is threatening us. So therefore,
I agree.
we need to get involved in this state agency and we need to get involved
Right,
in this local agency. It's just
right.
a ruse to sweep out any conservative opposition or conservative points of views on the
I
local
agree.
lower levels of government.
I agree. And the really the big problem is, I'm older than Brnovich, and so I was around, for the Cold War. Of course, so was Brnovich. So you get a lot of people, and you even have service members in the Arizona legislature. A lot of them, that grew up sort of in this Cold War, right? Oh, the USSR is this big evil bad guy. It's this boogeyman. We got to stop them at all costs. And that's really what the Democrats and their allies in the national security state really latched on to, because they have nothing else. And that's why in the ramp up to the 2020 election, you have basically CISA controlling the narrative,
And, and,
using it.
and I just have to point this out, Brian, because this just bothers me so much. They act like Russia is such a big threat when I personally believe, even though I despise Putin and think he's pure evil and there are horrible problems with Russia, I think the Chinese Communist Party, China right now, is a greater threat, spreading communism all over the world. So why isn't this being done in the name of stopping the CCP? I think the Democrats are soft when it comes to the CCP.
Well, they're not soft. They love the CCP. I mean, they actually love the CCP model of governance, right? The
Well, my
CCP,
my my leftist friend, who I talk about sometimes on X, he told me that he would rather live in China than in the United States, and he laid out
right,
all the reasons. This is how insane they are.
right. Well, China, a lot of people don't understand. you have this clash between fascism and communism and capitalism that have historically happened, that sort of give rise to World War II and this constant warfare since then. But China has really moved off of the communist model of governance and has really become sort of a fascist nation state in that it allows the private ownership of the means of production and distribution, provided that you run your companies first to meet the needs of the Chinese Communist Party. Why they still call it the Chinese Communist Party, I don't even know, because that's not communism, private ownership of means of production and distribution. But they've really adopted this sort of fascist model. The United States, if you look at the United States, is very fascistic in orientation, beginning with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They created all of these new federal government organizations, the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of this, that, and the other, right? That sort of control and limit what we can do as people and as businesses. And you get the growth of these large corporations that have far more power than most American citizens, whether it be in Congress or whether it be in these executive branch organizations. And so I think, one of the reasons you see people like Mark Elias and who's the other guy? I couldn't remember
Norm.
his name last time, Norm Eisen, right? These guys went apoplectic when the Chevron doctrine came out. I think it was last year, that got rid of these executive branch agencies' power to make law and interpret the law they were making, right? So they got rid of the Chevron doctrine, and they went apoplectic, and they went apoplectic because that was closer to the Chinese model of governance than U.S. constitutional Republican governance. And so and so that's what they like. They like the way the Chinese do business. They like the way the Chinese govern. And that's exactly what they want in the United States. And so, it's anti-Russia because what is Russia doing? Really, Russia is not a threat to the United States. They're not fighting us. They're only fighting in the Ukraine because what Obama did and started. They wanted to, they got Hunter Biden in there, and Hunter Biden was just a stooge of the CIA. That's why he went into the energy markets. They wanted to corner the energy markets so that they could push that energy out to Germany instead of Germany buying its petroleum from Russia, right? And so this is all part and parcel, of the same game. We have to oppose Russia because we want to maintain this system. We have to shut American dissenters down because we want to maintain this quasi-Chinese version of fascism that was existing. The Supreme Court's shutting it down. Trump is working to shut that down, and I endorse that 100%. And so, we still have institutional problems in the United States that need to be rectified to return the United States back to a constitutional republic. But look what Russia is doing. Does Russia have a Federal Reserve System that's reliant on the big bankers in London?
Apparently not.
No, they do not. And the big bankers in London don't like that, right? But the Federal Reserve System in the United States is it's an oligarchy. It's a group of what, five families, I think, that
It's
sort of
not
own.
federal and it's not a reserve.
It's not federal and it's not a reserve. It's all these people saying, yeah, not all these people, these five families saying, okay, yeah, sure, we'll print more money for you, but then, the US taxpayer is going to send them even more money so that they can have their largest estates. And a lot of this power comes centralized from London. And I think that's one of the reasons S.J. Turp and MI6 were so active in the United States during and after the Obama administration, S.J. Terp went so far as to say, when she was creating her system of propaganda, or what I like to call psychological war against the American people, she actually went and hung out with Trump supporters and sort of went and lived in their communities because she was studying the enemy, right? Studying the enemy. And so the reason they're studying the enemy is because, I think Trump he is the closest thing we've got to a president that will get rid of the income tax in the United States at the federal level. And I think he's the closest thing we've had in a very long time that will get rid of the Federal Reserve System and return American, monetary policy back to where it rightfully belongs with America's elected representatives. That is far closer to what Russia has been doing than what China's does, and so I think they like China for that reason.
So we've got about 7 minutes left. So I did want to,
What?
we're just having too much fun. So
Ah,
I,
you got it.
we
I'm
just
a
have to keep,
lawyer.
we
I'm a
just have to
lawyer. You need longer shows.
we just need to keep having you come back. So, I wanted to make sure we went over like the lawfare aspect against those who challenged the election wrongdoing because that was central to Brnovich. I
Yeah.
believe, I believe due to those 12 bar complaints against him that the bar dragged out and dragged out and dragged out against him and his deputies, and then finally, after months and months, they agreed to diversion agreements. But as you know, with diversion agreements, they're still watching you. And so
Right.
I went through a period with Brnovich when he was going through that process where he would text me multiple times. Whenever I'd say, "Oh, did you hear this criticism of you by this official?" He would text me and say, "Rachel, please do not send me that negative information due to my health issues and my heart. I can't process that. It's bad for me." So
Keep it
he was
keep it
already
healthy and
undergoing a
happy.
lot of stress. And I personally believe that the bogus bar complaints and all that hell he went through contributed to his heart attack.
Well, and people were that named attorneys in the Trump 2020 electoral cases also, had long fights with the state bar, that carried out through I think through the next election cycle. And so that, I mean, that's part of the problem is a lot of this spittle that was pushed down through the courts, it was pushed down through the bar associations by these representatives of the National Security Agency who would, hey, I'm with the CIA and I got to tell you, you shouldn't do a show about Bryan because, he's full of shit and he's just a Russian disinformation expert, right?
I
And
didn't know
and
you
and
were
so
Russian.
right. And so, it's like how do you control, the judicial narrative is a two-part component. You control the people who would bring the suit and cause a controversy then to exist. You would have a case in controversy if a suit was brought. So if you can control them and stop them from bringing lawsuits challenging elections, unless of course they're leftists, then you can sort of control the judicial narrative that way. And then the other way to control the judicial narrative is, to just go through your court system and to educate your judges about all of the allegations that will be made about, all of this Russian disinformation, and then to base that on completely false, what we know to be now completely false intelligence assessments, um, because the federal government can do what to us? They can propagandize us, right? So they create this false narrative that they can use to propagandize the American people. That becomes the propaganda to go into our bar associations. That becomes the propaganda to go through our
And,
courts.
and, and, and,
And
and, and
then,
these judges are required to take continuing legal education classes every year. And I'm sure CISA and some of these other agencies are part of the ones giving the presentations. So the judges all have the blueprints right in front of them. These continuing legal educations are all put on by leftists. So it's like,
well,
boom, you dismiss on lashes. Boom, you dismiss on no standing. Boom. The judges already have the model.
I tell you what, the I did an election refresher CLE after the second Kari Lake trial. The CLE was actually put on during the second Lake trial, so I couldn't watch it then because I was obviously in court representing Kari Lake. And so I watched it later and I was astounded, right? Who opens the CLE? None other than Adrian Fontes, right? Basically calling people who bring these election challenges fascists, right? What are you telling new or continuing members of the bar? He's standing behind a podium that says it's got the State Bar of Arizona blazing logo on it in the State Bar of Arizona's building, telling people you're a fascist if you bring these election challenges, all this stuff. But then when you look at the panel of people that were giving this CLE, now the State Bar of Arizona does some excellent CLE, and the ones I truly love are when attorneys and judges banter back and forth about what a rule means, about what a law means.
Different
That's the
viewpoints,
way,
different
right? The
viewpoints, not just
differing
one
viewpoints,
fascist
right?
viewpoint. Right.
Right. It's the but and the however. And so whenever you get this legal banter take place between judges, between counsel that are giving these CLEs, that's a good thing. That's healthy. But when you looked at the panel of this 2022 election CLE that I actually wasted my money taking, it was comprised 100% of either defense attorneys in Lake v. Hobbs 1 and the appellate actions, or employees of those people who were defendants in Lake v. Hobbs 1 and 2.
And we got to go. We are on our last few seconds.
100%.
But thank you, Bryan, for having on. It sounds like we know where we need to pick up next time. And thanks,
All
thanks
right.
everybody for watching.